The Linn-Mar Board of Directors regular meeting will be called to order at 5 p.m. in the boardroom of the Learning Resource Center. Can you please take roll to determine a quorum?
Buckles.
Here.
Maury.
Here.
Nelson.
Here.
Rollinger.
Here.
Walker.
Here.
Wall.
Here.
And Weaver.
Here.
Quorum is present.
Move to adopt the agenda as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Barry and a second by Rachel. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're going to open tonight's meeting with a public hearing regarding the district tennis courts project. So is there anyone here this evening that would like to speak with regards to the tennis courts project? Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing for the tennis courts project. All right, moving on to audience communication. At this time, I will call those who have signed up to speak to the microphone in the order they have signed up. The board will receive and acknowledge comments, but will not engage in a dialogue with the speaker because of the set agenda for the meeting. Remarks are limited to 3 minutes per speaker and should be shared in a respectful manner. Kurt Hancock.
Hello. The First Amendment, ratified in 1791, states that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. 5 rights stated clearly. The first again, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of a religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So where does separation of church and state come from? That phrase is not in the Constitution and is not in the Bill of Rights. Well, 10 years after the First Amendment was ratified, the Danbury Baptist Association sent a letter to President Thomas Jefferson expressing concern that the government wrote a law protecting religion, the First Amendment. They believed rightfully that the freedom of religion was an inalienable right, meaning God-given and thus cannot be taken away. Their concern was that since a law protecting religion was now in a civil document, the First Amendment, that government might be viewing freedom of religion as a government-granted right rather than a God-given right. And if a government can give you a freedom, government can take it away. 3 months later, President Jefferson responded in a letter stating that he understood their concern and agreed that man accounts only to God and not to government for his faith and religious expression. Jefferson wrote in his response, "Believing with you that religion is a matter that lies solely between man and his God, I contemplate with sovereign reverence which acts of the whole American people which declare that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." That letter made it clear that the wall of separation between church and state was built not to limit public religious expression, but to provide protection from government ever interfering with that expression, whether private or public. So why does this matter to anyone here? Because biblical values were intended to be taught in public schools, used to be taught in public schools, and the First Amendment is supposed to ensure that we can express those values in public schools. We need to get back to putting biblical values into our public schools. And a good way to do it is to go back to teaching the Constitution in our schools. Teach the original intent as clearly explained in documents such as the Congressional Record, the Federalist Papers, and letters such as to the Danbury Baptist Association. Thank you, and more to come.
Amy Hutchison.
Okay, my name's Amy. I'm a teacher, citizen here. I've been here for about 28 years. I just want to say a few things. I can't give up on it, so I'm just going to go and do it. This is hard for me. So, first of all, according to God's word, not according to the worldview, which I think we are really getting. We're really getting into a worldview. That's hard to explain, but children, it says, are to obey their parents in everything. Everything. It pleases the Lord when this happens. When we as a school district try to be the parents of children, we are in a very dangerous state. We're in a state of disobedience. When we don't let our parents know about our child's mental health or physical health, we are allowing children to be put in a very harmful situation. Sometimes it could lead to a lifetime of harm. We contact parents when negative behaviors happen at school and it gets out of hand. We contact parents when we put them on some kind of a behavior plan. We contact parents when they have the flu, when they have a fever, or they get hurt, when they are being bullied by others, when they are threatened by others, or when they miss too much school. Our parents help with IEPs, 504 plans. Why would we not want them to know when their child is having unhealthy thoughts or thoughts of somebody maybe they're not? Why? Please reconsider that policy. I can't remember what it is, the number. God is watching over us, and He will truly shine a light on this district if we do the right thing, and that is to let parents know everything we can. And I really, really, really believe this, and I think it is very important. Or our worldviews, He doesn't want us to go and think of those worldviews. He wants us to. He's holy, He's pure, and that's what we really need to get back to. Our parents are very important, and our child's health and mental health are very important, and parents need to know everything.
3 minutes is up.
Thank you.
Thank you to those who came this evening. We'll move on to informational reports. First up, we have Nathan and company. I won't read everybody. I'll let you introduce everybody. About the Teacher Paraeducator Apprenticeship Grant Program.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, good evening. It's good to be back in front of you. We're going to talk about the grant. Our colleague Phil Miller in HR was supposed to be here, but Phil had something come up today, so we'll kind of be covering Phil's part. But I'll let Jennifer introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Linn-Mar from Mount Mercy University. I am the chair of our education department and have worked in close partnership to design the instruction that has been provided so far and will continue to be provided for our teacher pathway.
Yeah, so we're super thrilled, as we mentioned to you before, of this partnership with Mount Mercy. Dr. Rasmussen and her team have been extraordinary in helping us get this grant set up and working. So what we want to do is just highlight for you kind of where we're at. We don't have any official slides or presentation, but figured you'd probably have some questions as well, so we'd be happy to do those. I'm going to highlight first the student pathway. So this last week we met with students. On Thursday we had nearly 40 high school kids that were interested in the associate or the paraeducator pathway. So if we end up with 15 to 20 from that group, that would be great. You know, there's some stipulations. They have to most likely have a driver's license so they can get to the buildings. They have to be over 16, so we talked to the kids about that. But we connected them with Laura Baskey, who's our teacher at the high school, because students will then have a choice whether they want to do the Kirkwood online courses or take Laura's 3 courses in her pathway. The kids were super excited. They had a ton of different questions. So Phil and I, Laura Baskey, and then Melissa Tandy as well in our student services department is going to be helping us with this. She works more so with the elementary, but talk to the kids about what the role of the associate looks like, because they had some questions about that. So next steps for them are to do some application. We're going to do some real basic interview just to kind of see what makes a good fit, because obviously we want to put these kids in a position to be not only to help us, but to be successful. So the goal would be, soon as we can get it up and running, we would have high school kids being paid out for as part of the grant. $12 an hour to work as associates in our, most likely our elementary buildings. We may do some intermediate middle school if that placement seems necessary, and that's what Melissa's gonna help us with in our department. So, the other thing is then we are officially registered with the state as an official apprenticeship. So I've seen and heard a lot about apprenticeships across the community, and whether it be welding or nurse practitioner type stuff. So we just got ours registered as part of a formality with the grant, but we are an official apprenticeship. So I'll talk some more from our HR side and some of the things that Phil was gonna share, but I'll turn it over to Jennifer to talk about the teacher pathway.
So we currently have 22 paraprofessionals or student support associates registered in our teacher pathway. There's an additional 2 who may be starting in October, which puts us at what I understand to be maximum capacity. We want to utilize the entire grant funding. Each of those candidates are seeking certification elementary K-6 classroom with an additional endorsement in Strat 1 special education. So in 2 years, we should have an influx of special education teachers available to hire. They also have the opportunity to add additional classes on top of the grant courses to complete their Strategist 2 endorsements, which leads to K-12 certification as well in special education. They are taking 2 classes at a time. Those are offered at in the lecture hall at Linn-Mar High School, and so they don't have to travel very far. We have instructors who come here to teach those courses, and they are going to be supervised by Mount Mercy faculty in the field experiences that they're taking as well. So it's really important that everyone knows that we are not cutting any requirements for these students. They are receiving traditional teacher preparation. All of the requirements for full licensure will be met at the end of this program. Finally, I want everyone to know that of all of the grant programs across the state, we are one of a very few who are truly a face-to-face program where we are sharing space with our students and we are interacting directly with them in the classrooms. We are also the only partnership that has one school district and one teacher preparation program, which allowed us to tailor specifically to the needs of the students who are your employees.
Yeah, so we think we're pretty fortunate. We've, like I said, had a great partnership. We are hearing from our colleagues around the state that maybe our partnership is a little bit unique in that sense, that we are only a single school partnered with a single post-secondary education institution. There's a great article in the Gazette this weekend about Marion's program because they partnered with several small districts, and Dave is probably thankful we didn't do that because that's a bookkeeping nightmare. So even though it's enough of a bookkeeping nightmare for us right now, we are really off to a great start. So, you know, when you write a grant, you're really not sure how it's going to go. Our team that's been working on this is pleased to see. Phil had just a couple updates from the HR and employee side. Right now we have 50 total employees participating. Like Dr. Rasmussen said, the number in the Mount Mercy track, but then we have 27 in the Kirkwood track. So some of our current associates that didn't have the paraeducator certification are in that track taking that course through Kirkwood. All of them will have their para certification by spring, which will also allow associates to work as substitute teachers if needed in their classrooms for up to 5 days. So not only are we helping the future employee shortage, but we can help in the short term our sub shortage a little bit as well. Phil just wanted to mention lots of thanks again to Mount Mercy for our partnership. It's really been great working with them, the high school staff, just for making the space available. Being able to offer that on site, I think, is a tremendous benefit to those employees that are already in the district that don't have to travel. Jerry's team working with IT and tech has been super helpful in getting them access even when that was happening in the midst of all the technology challenges we were having. That's right when they were starting classes. Dave's support from the financial side of things, it's a lot to track. Some of the other school districts chose to offset the cost of the grant by not paying their employees an additional $6. I'm not quite sure the rationale for that, but they structured that differently in their grant, I think, to support some of the back end work. We felt really strongly in our grant that to incentivize people, that money needed to go directly toward them because that was kind of the intent of the grant. And so Dave's worked hard with HR to kind of figure out, and payroll, what that's gonna look like, because there's a certain amount that employees get through their service over the course of the year, and it's tied to a specific dollar amount. So just trying to figure how that all looks each pay period has been really tricky, but we appreciate Dave's help with that. So, yeah, so that's where we're at. Super exciting. We've got a lot of stuff to do then over the next couple years. Probably our biggest challenge facing us right now is what are we gonna do when these 20-some people have to student teach? Because that'll take 20 people out of their positions for short term to be able to meet their student teaching requirements. So we don't have an answer for that yet. We'll keep working on that, but that's one of the things we're looking at as a challenge that won't happen until probably next semester, year and a half. We have to.
Yeah, we have a couple
Sorry,
semesters to
yeah,
figure it out.
several semesters before we have to get into that. But we wanted to share that with you, and we're happy to answer any questions you might have about the grant program.
Before we open up the questions, I want to commend both of you and Phil for your work to make this happen, because we didn't get notification of grant approval until May, if I remember correctly. So to pull all of this together at the school end and at the... Was it June? Okay. Yeah, even better. But at the local level and also at the college level was a monumental task to get done. And I also want to reiterate what Nathan said. When we're hearing from colleagues across the state about the experience being different, he means we're having a better experience than many are having in this. And a lot of that goes to Mount Mercy and the work that they have committed to helping us out with too. So I want to make sure to really acknowledge Jennifer and her team's commitment to making this happen and how that's working out for us so well to begin with too. So these things are fantastic programs, but they don't come easily and they don't come without a lot of collaboration. So. So before you open up, I want to make sure to throw that out there too.
Yeah, it's certainly an alternative pathway, but we also, you can tell that rigor piece is still here. Like, our employees are still going to get a very rigorous post-secondary experience to prepare them for the teaching position. So I feel really comfortable about making those hires in the future, just due to the program that Mount Mercy's built up. So it's great.
How many classes do they have to take to prepare, like in this 2 years? Is it 2 each semester? I mean,
They are offered in 5 and 10 week blocks. So
Okay.
they are the equivalent of full-time semesters. So it's a total of 71 credits over 2 years. They will be taking summer classes this coming summer, in which we're working out plans to offer summer programming to K-6 students so that they have that teaching experience in the summer as well. So there's an alternate benefit there as well to district students. But yes, it's a full-time program.
So the Kirkwood track is essentially done in the spring, correct? You said they'll have their para certification in the spring. So does that end it, or can we start like a second round when those 27 finish?
That's a good question. Yeah, Phil and I have talked about that a little bit. The Kirkwood track too is not like on the same timeline as the Mount Mercy track, because they could really do those online courses at any time. The requirements of the grant just say that they have to be working toward those. We talked to the kids about that too. If they're a junior, most likely they won't get all 3 of Mrs. Vasquez's classes this year. So if they took 1 this year, they could take 2 next year, or 2 this year and 1 next year, whatever their schedule would allow. So yes, as long as there's funding there, we do believe we can add additional people. Now, probably not to the teacher pathway because of the time frame that there is with that, but let's say we made a mid-year hire as an associate. If that person met the qualifications and there were still funds available in the grant, we could start that person.
I was just curious because you said the 27 are our current associates that are
Yes.
working. So if we had, like you said, we hired more associates, that we could then
Yep.
do a second, because it's a
And
shorter.
then, on top of that 27 number, we'll add however many we end up with.
The high
hopefully
school
in the
students.
next 1 or 2 weeks, figuring out how many high school students we'll have.
How long is the student teaching?
Student teaching is a full semester. All of the requirements of Chapter 79 of Iowa Code have to apply, which means they are required to do 14 weeks of full-time student teaching.
And will all these be graduating to do student teaching at the same time, or will some of them be staggered?
This is a cohort, and so they would be scheduled to student teach in the same semester. That's why it's a challenge. However, we've talked about ways to minimize the impact, because they can do student teaching in the classroom where they're assigned for one of those 8 weeks with some adjustments to the requirements of their job. And then we would need another placement, but they do have to be under a supervising teacher to complete those requirements. So while the grant gave us a lot, the grant did not minimize any requirements for teacher licensure.
Well, the
And so we
reason for
still
my
have to do
question was simply that if they didn't all graduate at the same time and move, then you could stagger that in, and finding, you know, those replacement as those people are going through there might not be such a burden on the district at one time. That was the only reason I asked the
I also
question.
think they're pretty spread out throughout the district, so that's good in the fact that, you know, it's not really localized to one building. So we think we can get creative and, you know, and if they're in their student teaching, obviously that frees up the teacher as well for a portion of that time to help in other areas. So we may just need to get creative in our reassigning of people during those student teaching weeks. So that's one thing I know we've talked about, some options around that.
I have two or three, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I have two or three questions. The first one is where did this program come from?
So this is part of, I think, the ESSER, the COVID relief funds that the state
Okay,
approved.
okay,
They originally had though like 4 million, like the intent was to only have 100 participants across the entire state, or 10 cohorts of 10 people, I think is what it was originally. So when we wrote the grant, we asked like, well, do we write it for 10 because we think we'll have 75 or more? And they said, no, write it for the full amount, as if you could get, you know, pie in the sky idea. And so the state actually, from their initial grant proposal, increased this to the 40 million that it ended up at. So,
Cool.
and I think that was some of the rescue funds and the Rescue Cares Act, that type of stuff from COVID.
so the second question then is, you know, you made a comment that you might have too many students into this role. Well, let's deal with that when the time comes, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think we'll have
Yeah.
too many.
Yeah.
What, you mean high school students?
Well, you made a comment that 20 students could be, you know, are we ready for that, or can we handle that?
Oh, I got you.
Let's deal with that when the time comes, right?
Right.
It's a good problem to have.
And then the last item is, and that's part of education in my eyes, there's still people that are trying this out. That's what student teaching is, and that's what it is. So they're going to try this out, and there might be 2 or 3 or 4 students that might say, this is not what I want. And that's positive, because it's helping them get through the system and sort out what they want and where they want to go. So that'll sort some of that out, too. I've gotten more phone calls in the last week after that newspaper article than I have, well, we get a lot of phone calls, but these have been more positive phone calls than I've seen, because maybe it's my age group of people thinking this is an awesome program because it's helping give these paras a chance. It's giving more chances. I think it's huge, so thank you. Yeah.
And there's the personal side, and I'm sure you're seeing that, like, Dr. Asmussen had a sit-down meeting with everybody in this, and this is life-changing for some employees. Like,
Absolutely.
never thought they would have had the funding available to do this type, and to be able to, you know, get the licensure and the degree that comes with this is really life-changing for some people. So, yeah, and we're hearing a lot of that in the groups that we talk to, just thankful for the opportunity and really appreciative of the work that they're doing.
'Cause I think some of your paras go into this program because they want to be in schools the same hours their kids are in, first of all. Second of all, they like what they do, and they know there's a need for it, and it's just going to bump them to the next level. I think it's huge, so, yeah.
And I'm teaching the first class in the cohort myself. And I will say the quality of our student, who are your employees, is tremendous. And so that was one piece. We didn't know what the interest would be. I love to come to work every Tuesday night and spend my time with these individuals who just really want to make a difference.
I want to say thank you to Mount Mercy for going, going for it with us. I mean, especially if you got everything in June. Oh my, you guys, thank you for caring to do this. Rachel?
I have a couple of questions. Did I understand you to say that we're doing interviews in order to select the people that are participating in this program?
Just for our high school kids.
Just for the high school
Yeah,
kids?
just for the high school kids.
Have you had more kids like apply than you have spots for?
No.
Okay, okay.
We just,
So is it,
because they're 16, 17, and 18-year-olds and gonna be working, and, we wanna make sure we put everybody in a place to be
absolutely,
successful.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
So our interview's gonna be more about fit, kind of, hey, what level are you thinking? Is there a building? Maybe get them in their elementary building. Do they have a teacher that they worked with? Those
Okay.
types of things, so.
It's
okay.
good for them to go through the interview,
Yeah,
if nothing
absolutely.
else. I mean, make it pretty official and give them that practice of how do I react and what do I do, and,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. It's great learning.
It makes it real.
It
Like,
does.
this is an actual job, this isn't an extracurricular activity that you can flake out on if you don't like.
Absolutely.
It puts some responsibility in there.
Yeah, I
So-
shared with Shannon, Dave, I haven't shared this with you yet. We were in front of the high school kids, and this young man raised his hand and said, hey, do we get paid in cash? I said, buddy, I don't get paid in cash. You're not gonna get paid in cash. It doesn't work that way. So when you talk about a learning curve too, they're gonna be on payroll, they're gonna have to fill out some paperwork.
Love it.
They'll have tax implications.
Absolutely.
These kids will get IPers
That
as
FICA,
16-year-olds.
that FICA stuff kicks in
Wow.
too.
Yeah, they'll have.
They don't
maybe
get
a
that, how
quarter of
cool that
interest.
is.
So,
They really
yeah,
don't.
So they have a lot
That's
to learn
amazing.
about this, that's for sure.
And they
That's
probably
cool.
thought you had a cash box sitting there, just, here's your sign-on bonus.
So I'm wondering, is there any indication about whether this program will continue beyond this kind of first
know.
go-round?
At this time, no, but to back up, prior to the grant, this was a result of a task force that was statewide addressing the teacher shortage in Iowa. That was appointed by the governor, and this is the governor's response to the task force's recommendations. And so part of our requirements will be, as the teacher preps, to report out what worked, what didn't work, and what are our recommendations going forward. As far as other funding, we have not heard because this did come from ESSER money, which is somewhat unique. However, there are lots of other funding sources. If we consider Teach grants and Pell grants and Iowa tuition grants that are already in place and put a package together, we can get really close for another cohort. We cannot give them $6 an hour raise, but beyond that, as far as the tuition, we're looking at opportunities to start a follow-up cohort, but we can't guarantee a grant.
That's awesome.
Well, I think you've,
I do think this would be a perfect opportunity as we approach legislative season
Yeah.
to
Yes,
really advocate
absolutely.
for programs like this to be continued, because there's no doubt it's a very successful program, even as it gets started, in a very needed
Show the success.
program as well.
Yeah.
And we are always asking for certain things, but to show appreciation for what has already been done and to ask for that to be continued would be a really important piece for us to.
That was
have those
my first
conversations. But I didn't mean to
question.
cut you off, but I
It
thought
came from the
tied in
governor.
with your question.
Thank you.
Well, I remember us sitting here with Shannon, you and I, and there was a lot of people. Liz Mathis was here and some others that sat and talked about the shortage of teachers and what did we as educators and people within the district think we should do in order to entice people to become teachers. So there was a lot of, I think, cross parties looking at this and thinking it's important and we need to do something. And we were trying to, it came down to, one of the comments was, as a teacher, the teachers and the people in education need to be advocates for themselves as to why they like their job. Why did they decide to do that? And that's really true. You've got to keep it a positive for them.
one more.
Go ahead.
I've got just one more question, and that is, you had mentioned that Linn-Mar is the only district that's partnering with Mount Mercy to do this together. And I was just curious, is that because other metro area schools have not gotten this grant, or have they chosen to partner with other schools?
And ask for-
What?
Yeah,
Sorry, go
the
ahead.
other metro schools partnered in different ways. Some of them are participating, some of them aren't. The numbers within the Cedar Rapids district, for example, are very small. They're combined with the Marion consortium.
Okay.
And so each application was designed differently.
Okay.
As Nate said, we shot for the moon and we got it, and we are very fortunate to have received that. And so it simply was, we were ready to go in and thought we could meet the requirements together.
Part of what we talked about early too was that Mount Mercy was able to commit based on what we thought was numbers to a full cohort. And so I think that early on in the grant process really changed our thinking because as they were building out what that might look like, you know, we didn't know. I'm surprised we're as close to numbers as Phil and I anticipated. But we thought we'd have 25, and that's what we wrote the grant for, and we'll have 24. So I think that helped us because then it allowed us to say we've got enough kids that we think we can do this just with each other instead of extending that. But there are other consortiums, and then it's just everybody wrote their grants a little bit differently. So
Who are they partnering with? Like what higher education institution?
University of Northern Iowa is a big partner.
Sense.
They were approved for a fully online program this year in connection with their grants. There's also University of Dubuque and William Penn University are the biggest recipients of candidates outside of us. And so our receiving is fairly small, but we wanted to do it right. And so we wanted to really focus on the biggest impact for that cohort.
Tremendous job on
Yes,
this, guys.
thank you,
Absolutely
thank you, thank
tremendous
you.
job.
We're excited.
Thank you.
You.
Okay, next up, Policy Committee met, as you can tell, because there's a bunch of policies on the agenda. Sandra or Rachel, do you have any comments about our recent meeting?
If you do.
Thought it was a very good meeting. A lot of what we went through was pretty, just minor changes, pretty perfunctory, but we did have an opportunity to review the substance. Had a very lengthy conversation about that, and I thought it was really productive, and it was the first meeting that we had with Dave. That was kind of,
He gave us some ideas of things that we needed to look at and change, and, you know, so it's his first opportunity to kind of go through some of those. So we were working together and thought went well. Anytime we look at these, it's important, so.
And a lot of these it's the first policy committee meeting of the year generally is what did legislation do and what changes are we making? So most of these are because of that. So that also made it kind of easy to go through. But I don't have anything else to add. Does anyone have questions for the committee?
Would this be the time to ask about specific questions regarding policies that were presented, or should we wait to have that during the discussion time for the motion? I have some questions regarding the substance abuse policies.
Could be either.
Why don't we do it?
Yep, now it's fine.
Yeah, why don't we do it now, and that
Okay.
way,
Yeah, so
Might clean up the motion process.
on
Yes.
policy 502.3, was there any discussion? The second to last paragraph reads to me as though it's a little bit duplicative, and I'm wondering if this was maybe reworded and
That we added.
the intention is not exactly what it's meaning. What I believe has happened in the past at Linn-Mar, and I don't know for sure, so forgive me if I'm wrong, but that students that had some kind of violation of a substance use policy would have the opportunity to receive a substance use assessment and then follow through with the recommendations of that assessment in lieu of suspension or expulsion. And this is how it's worded, is it's basically saying that they will have disciplinary action automatically, which would include suspension, expulsion, and that they may have the opportunity to complete a required substance abuse rehabilitation program, but we can't necessarily require something like that if they don't have the assessment to determine that that's what they need. And so there's just some like wording concerns that I have in there. So I'm just kind of curious what the conversation was on that piece of it.
I was not aware that that was an option. That's not something I've ever heard of personally. So it may be an option that students are given a substance abuse assessment in lieu of suspension or expulsion. And if that were the case, I do think we could probably take that back and do a little bit more tweaking. That's just not something I had ever heard of. And Shannon, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more.
Yep. I'd be glad to. The actual focus of our conversation really revolved around policy 1004.3, which is more for use of school facilities and school and community relations. So we spent a lot of time on the wording of that policy, which applies to adults and students. And then the policy you're specifically referring to, 502.3, the changes that were made there were made just to align with 1004.3's changes, to avoid having any contradictory or misleading statements in one versus the other policy piece of it. So we did not really spend time discussing the pieces you're talking about on that. It's something we certainly can add, because procedurally that is typically what happens in our high school, the educational process for students, and support that way as part of the experience potentially as well too. So
That's kind of practice, is what you're saying, is that they would be referred for an assessment, and then based on the recommendations of the assessment, they have the option to complete an assessment. Best practice would be they have the option to complete an assessment and then follow through the recommendations of that assessment, or they can follow through with disciplinary procedures. But we would want to treat this like a medical situation or behavioral health situation, just like we would any other behavioral health behavior. And so I guess that would be my recommendation, would be that particular paragraph be looked at to align with what sounds like maybe is the practice right now.
more of our current handbook and procedures and practice that takes place.
Yeah.
So
that it doesn't, because the way I read it, it's saying that that they would have disciplinary action, including suspension or expulsion, and I don't know that I would be supportive of that.
let me make sure I'm understanding it right though, Melissa. As I look at I think you're referring to the second to last paragraph. Is that accurate?
Yep,
So
so
the
the
second
first
sentence
sentence.
specifically says students who violate the terms may also be required satisfactorily complete a substance abuse assistance program or rehabilitation program. So is that the part you would like to make?
It's the first
wording
and second
changes or the
paragraph,
first
or
sentence
first and
that-
second sentence. So the
Okay.
first sentence reads, violation of this policy by students will
Will
result in disciplinary action, including suspension or expulsion, which we wouldn't necessarily do that unless they chose to take that path instead of the rehabilitation
Perhaps
path.
And it's
may
kind of alluded to in
instead
the
of will.
last sentence of that paragraph.
Yes.
As well. So maybe the shall
Yep.
instead of will.
And then
may
I
instead
think
of
for
will.
the substance abuse assistance or rehabilitation program is really contingent upon whether or not that's recommended based on their assessment. If they have an assessment and a rehabilitation program is not indicated, then it wouldn't be appropriate for them to participate in a treatment program.
And I'm not an expert, so I could be wrong, but I think that if we change the word from will to shall, is that what you said, Shannon?
May.
May. We have to be careful about the specifics we put in policy versus what is procedure, because procedure allows us the flexibility to, or the district, to have flexibility in the situation, whereas if it's in policy, this is what you have to do. So I think we want to be careful about adding all of that to the policy, because it may not apply to every case, but putting in the shall wording, I would be comfortable with that.
I think along with those lines, I think we need to take out the section about they may be required to complete a substance abuse assistance or rehabilitation program, because the district can't require a student to do that.
Well, and there may be challenges to that as well.
We can recommend it.
Financial challenges, or, I mean, for sure what you're
Right.
saying, but then even if they recommend it, there may be roadblocks there.
Their choices are they do it or they have the disciplinary action, but we can't require that.
So you're asking, Melissa, and I appreciate that, you're asking to send it back to the committee to relook at it before we make a final decision.
For that, for that particular section.
Based on the feedback I'm hearing, I think it would be good to go back and review the wording there to make sure it matches with our handbooks, and then come back with the policy with policy committee for further discussion on that section to make
Especially-
sure everything's aligned
I
and
reached out
consistent as well.
to some past coworkers that do this substance use policy stuff, and I just haven't had a chance to get that all to the committee since this morning, since I was reviewing it, but.
And I mean, like Shannon said, since this one specifically was only on here to make it match the other one, we didn't have a full discussion on like these other things. So I'm fine. Yeah, we can
Is
send it
that
back.
the only one that you're thinking that we should look at?
I think the only other thing on both of those two, I would suggest adding in paraphernalia, but that's a one-word addition. And
You're
that would
saying-
apply to both the 1004.3 and the 502.3.
So when we make the motion, then it could be to accept the things except for those of which we plan to review? Is that what I'm
Or the
understanding?
104.3 could just be with the modification of adding in paraphernalia. Either one.
Okay.
I would be comfortable with that. There weren't any other changes on that one.
Then we can make sure that they're in sync and they make sense, and
For sure.
Right.
that way there's no problem with that.
I'd like to, are you done? Okay. A couple of questions on the Board of Director conflict of interest disclosure form. And I may have missed it, and I apologize, I don't have it here with me. Is that something that needs to be done once a year, every year, one time?
Probably do it annually now that we're doing it on a consistent basis. I know most organizations, it happens at their annual meeting, so we would do it again in November.
So that was my next question, is when would that happen?
Staff do it during their reviews at the end of the year. So staff won't do it in November, but the board can do it in November.
Okay, so then at the beginning of the school year, like at the beginning of this school year, there should be one on file for any staff. Since this was in place, is that correct?
If there's staff members that have completed one, yes.
Not everyone has to do one.
Correct. We don't give it to everybody and say,
Right, that-
do this.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, okay.
Yep.
And then late this afternoon, there was an email that came in regarding lots of questions regarding 202.7, and I mean, I got it was sent at 3:15 or whatever, and I didn't see it till 4 o'clock. But there's a lot of questions in there, and obviously didn't have
Which one?
much time to go through it.
202.7.
202.7. That, again, just reading through it briefly, there's a lot there. I think it may be worth our time to do the same thing with that policy as well, to look at those, to send that back to answer those questions.
Let me ask you a question. I apologize. Where did that email come from?
From a community citizen. And again,
I'm sorry. It came from where?
Citizen?
Community
Asking
Community citizen.
Citizen, a citizen of our community.
I need to know that stuff. I mean, we can't just throw stuff in the air and expect everybody to know what we're talking about. I just need to know where it's coming from, so.
That's fine, and like I said, I literally got it less than an hour before the meeting, and that's why briefly looking, I haven't had a chance to look through it at all, but there's a lot there, and I'm just making the suggestion that the policy committee look at it.
We did.
The change to this policy comes from legislation, just the amount, and it's supposed to help the substitute shortage. The rest of that's the only change from the current policy
Everything
is
up.
the 6,000 to 20,000 through legislation. We didn't really review the rest of the policy because there weren't needed changes in the meeting. That was
Fair enough.
that's why the policy came up, was
Okay.
because of the legislative change.
That's fine. One question I do have on the change that is made, what was the discussion from the 6,000 to 20,000?
It's legislation.
That is legislation,
Yeah.
that is in, okay.
It's to help alleviate, so someone can substitute more. They're not limited to only make $6,000. They can substitute more and make up to $20,000 as a substitute rather than 6. And that was legislative change. House File 2266.
Thank you.
At least with this, as a reminder, is the email you're referring to, I believe, the one I'm thinking of anyway, like you said, the timing of that, probably everybody hasn't had a chance to see it or look at it.
Right.
But that is also why we have 2 readings of the policies, to give people a chance to check it out between now and next meeting as well. So even if we do leave it in and do approve it now, we'd certainly come back to give everybody a chance to look at the feedback that's provided before the next meeting when it would be read for the second time.
Any other questions for Policy Committee? All right, we'll move to Finance Audit Committee. We had a nice meeting with Dave last week, also his first Finance Audit Committee meeting. He's taking care of all his firsts this month. Barry or Clark, do you have any comments or anything you want to share from our meeting?
Well, I think we need to talk about, and that's going to be part of our agenda in the future here, right? So yeah, I just asked Dave, and I apologized. I asked Dave to go to the other room and get some information for me, because as we move into the talk about the LRC building and all that, and that was a majority of our discussion, you know, the bid came in higher than expected. However, the square footage is 50% higher than what we started. So those are 2 items. And then the last item was, and help me out here, guys, is we got save fund estimates from the state. That was the huge positive to us, because those came in higher than expected. Do you want to touch on that, Dave, or do you
I
want?
think I have it here. We had
it
budgeted
1.2?
7.9 million,
Yep.
and we're getting, right now, the estimate is 8.2.
So those are all positives. So.
Just to clarify one thing Barry said, you mentioned the increase of the amounts coming in as bids that were not bids yet, just cost estimates as we go through the estimation process.
My mistake. Yes, you're correct.
So I'll make sure to clarify that. I knew you
But
knew
we'll
that.
talk about that later on.
Correct.
So
Yeah.
we don't need to get into that.
Nope.
We had a great discussion. This SAVE discussion was good. All of those items were good, so.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of different things when we started getting the pricing and stuff on how we can reduce the burden of the financial aspect of it. And we even offered some different things that maybe OPN could look into to reduce this. Last time they reported, they didn't have all the bids in and stuff like that, so we took it upon ourselves to look at all of those. And some were pretty minor, and so we don't know how it's all going to add up, this piece, that piece, whatever. Obviously, you know, like Barry said, we'll be looking into it a little bit more later on, but you know, simply because we're increasing the square footage and stuff like that out of necessity, we all agreed that that is vitally important that we do that. And we did spend a heck of a lot slicing and dicing as much as we could, you know, to reduce the cost.
And I think we're, when we move into that conversation here in a bit, OPN's going to give us an update, so we'll be able to dig into those details as well. Any questions for the Finance Audit Committee? Matt has an update for us from Marion City Council.
Not a lot as it pertains to Linn-Mar. Continuation of what Sandra gave us a rundown on last time. They had their final reading for that area out by Boulder Peak. They did have their final reading and vote to approve it with some minor changes. I think they reduced the number of lots there from 80 to 65, so it'll be a little bit bigger lots, but really nothing else that will affect the district in any way.
Just want to, sorry, I'm not cutting in on you, Matt, but I talked to a city council member today, and I reached out to him. He's a client of mine as well. But my question was, in the newspaper this week, they talked about the need for more housing in Marion. And so I said to him, I said, okay, so you've got these plats out here by Boulder Peak, et cetera. And he says, yes, in all sincerity, we need more housing. I said, affordable housing, single family. He said, we need more single family housing in Marion. So the demand from people coming in, from realtors, et cetera, want more housing. So that will impact us as a district, yeah. So I appreciate your comment, but that just was a comment made today to me, so thank you.
They happen to mention timeline, but in any way, shape, or form?
No, they're still in negotiations with, the developer right now is still in negotiations with the buyer, hoping that one buyer buys the entire thing to develop it, but no real timeline.
Hand it over to Shannon for your update.
Yeah, pretty simple update for you today. I was able to attend the Association of Education Service Agencies National Conference and Call for Action last week in Washington, D.C. I want to thank Grantwood AEA for making that possible and for paying for the entire trip as well. It was a very unique opportunity. I've never had the chance to go to the Capitol and talk to legislators at the federal level. We do that all the time at a state level. It was really interesting to do that at a national level as well. As I mentioned to you on Friday, the trip was split into two pieces. Very quick trip, flew in Wednesday, came back Friday. But the first part was all conference-focused educational things. Just gave us updates on where things stood with Supreme Court decisions, healthcare rulings, things that are coming down the pipeline on just how to help address staff shortages at a federal level as well, in addition to what's happening here locally, and just some pretty good overview of things from a national perspective. And then we talked about key pieces that we wanted to have a common message for going forward with the legislators as well. And then the advocacy portion was very interesting. Each state was assigned their representatives to meet with. The state of Iowa was split in half essentially, so the group I was part of, we met with Senator Grassley individually, and then we met with representatives from Senator Ernst's office and Representative Axney's office as well, their chief of staff, and their staff members were present. They could not be there. Really good discussions. I was appreciative of their time, first of all, their willingness to listen and ask questions. I feel like I wasn't really sure at that level how engaged or interested they would be in what we have to share. They're actually very willing to listen, to ask questions, help clarify, and try to look at things from a federal lens. We really focused heavily on a couple of topics in our conversation. We've talked about this for years at the board table of how do we get more federal funding for IEP students, because the federal government continues to underfund IDEA. I think they're supposed to, their initial commitment back in the original writing of the law was they were going to commit 40% from the federal and 60% from the state level. And I think right now they're like 12.8% is all they fund, somewhere in that neighborhood. So we really emphasized just funding what they currently have in place to help us. It was probably the biggest thing we spent time on. There's a lot of interest from the federal level about staffing challenges, workforce. They hear that from everybody. So to hear that from the education field, they were very interested in some opportunities there for some bills and different options there too. We did talk about cyber challenges, cybersecurity, and then some school connectivity opportunities to make sure all of our students have access to technology, so to help level the playing field. So those are kind of the main things we spent time on with each representative, and then they had follow-up questions for us that kind of went different directions with things too. But really good conversations. It was an interesting opportunity to get to connect. That was the positive. The challenging side of it is they are just churning through groups they meet with on a half-hour basis. So I don't know by the end of the day if they even keep track of who they talk to. They took very good notes, but how much of that sticks with them over time, I don't know. It's just they have groups coming through there all day long. It was pretty clear too. So really good conversation. I was honestly very pleased with their responsiveness to us too. So.
To meet with Representative Hinson?
No, the other half of Iowa, thank you. The other half that was of the Iowa delegate that was there met with representatives from Hinson's office. I believe they met with Marion Miller-Meeks in person. I think it was her in person, and then Representative Feenstra was their representative from their office as well too. So we split the 6 Iowa delegates.
Flopped around.
Yep, it was all based on schedules as far as who we could connect with and how we could get into their schedules. And they were working, even the schedules they had set up had to be modified because some votes went long, some other votes were changing, so they were on the go, and it was a lot of hurry up and wait opportunities too. But so we covered all 6 of the Iowa, either senators, representatives, just we each only got to talk to 3. And then the last thing I'll mention, well, any other questions on that
I'm just really glad you went.
experience as well?
I think it's an excellent opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciated the Grant Wood's willingness to set it up and coordinate it, and a nice mix of small schools and large schools and AEA staff as well, so from across the state. So interesting opportunity for sure. And then finally, I just want to recognize 2 students that are mentioned in the cabinet update this time. We had 2 students that are National Merit Scholarship semifinalists, Kara Cooper and Ashna Korea. To qualify for that, you have to be in the top 1% of over 1.5 million students who participated in the PSAT test last year. So congratulations to those 2 individuals as well, because that's pretty elite. So we'll make sure that doesn't get lost in that cabinet update report that's there as well, because it's safe to say I was not a National Merit Scholar semifinalist. I'm sure others in this room were, but that's pretty.
Congratulations
That's
to
a
those
tremendous
students.
accomplishment.
Yeah.
for
Yeah,
us.
that's awesome.
Absolutely.
I wasn't either, so.
Not even
Think
sure
for
I
any
knew
of
what
us.
one was.
Loved ones.
Oh, Barry. All right, any other questions for Shannon at this time? All right, we'll move on to unfinished business.
Make a motion to approve the final schematic design and cost estimate for the district tennis courts project.
Second.
I have a motion from Rachel and a second by Barry, but before we vote, I'm gonna, oh wait, is this the tennis, never mind, wrong one. Sorry. I'm motion by Rachel and a second by Barry. All those in favor?
We're gonna have a discussion.
Oh wait, do you have any questions?
I just have one question. Shannon, did I understand from your memo that we added the lights back into the design?
They're there.
Correct.
Okay.
On the middle court.
Yep.
On the middle court?
Yep.
There's
So
2 middle courts.
Okay. And
4
what-
actually. It's 2 groups of 2.
2 and 2.
Yep.
Yeah.
That,
What was-
the state is interested in hosting state and district regional competitions at our new facilities, but we
okay.
have to have lights.
But we have to have lights.
That was a recent update. In past decisions, the state, when they assigned district to regional locations and state locations, lights had not been a part of the criteria they looked at. Fortunately, our athletic director, Tanya Moe, was at a meeting sometime in the recent weeks, and that was brought up that as they go forward, lights will be a factor because of weather delays, just challenges they were having as well. So she called me panicked from that meeting and said, is it too late to put that back on the tables again too? So we scrambled around, worked with Hall & Hall and OPN to make that, because we had originally had lights in, we're concerned about the cost, took it out, and then because of this ruling, it would be a shame to have a beautiful new facility and not be able to host that level of events as well too. So kind of the compromise spot for us is we will not have lights on all 8 of the courts, but the 4 middle courts in that initial column will have lights
That's
access
enough
as well. Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Okay.
A lot of times by the time they get to that late in the evening, some competitions are already completed, some matches, the 4 would be sufficient.
And then what was the cost increase for that?
Oh, that's a great
specifically? Or do
question.
we-
I don't have
Is
the
that
kind
kind
of
of
breakdown.
challenging to figure
I'm
out?
looking at OPN funds to see.
About 275,000.
Okay.
The nice thing about that though is if we do bid it, it's its own unit.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Hey, Rachel,
Positive side of
just
that
to
too
add a
is-
little bit.
Well, the other thing I'll mention, Clark, first, before I forget, is financially, even with the lights added back in that we're adding, we're still under the initial budget item we had of $2 million. We're still
Yeah.
under that piece of it too,
Well,
which
and
we
then as
were
Barry said,
pleased
we're
with.
expecting some more money from saves.
Will help.
And you
like
were
we're
still.
Clark.
and
Getting
you were
lucky.
Tennis courts, we're actually paying with Pebble, right?
Pearl funds
Pearl.
and a little bit of save dollars as well, if I remember right. Is that correct,
Still
Dave?
meeting with the city on that too.
Yeah, the lights initially, the city had a lot of interest in partnership with lights, and then as we got closer to it and the cost scared them away. But now that we're back on the docket for lights, I would like to go back and talk to Parks and Rec Department again and see if they have any interest in that as well. I don't know what chances of success, but I think as things keep evolving, it's a conversation at least worth having.
And it could be beneficial for the city because if we are having those regional competitions, that's tourism money,
Rest-
that's potential.
Restaurants, hotels,
Yep.
yeah, if we're hosting a state tournament, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was, when we were discussing this, that came up, and knowing how Tanya filled this out, I know she has sent everything to the mayor, and hopefully there will be a continuing discussion, because to piggyback what you said, I brought up the fact that if we have people coming into our area to play in district or state competition, the unique thing is that we have the other courts right there for consolation matches. But when you think of hotels and you think of the food industry, there's really nothing close but what's right here in Marion. So there's going to be a huge benefit to the city of Marion, and hopefully we will kind of strongly encourage the city council to reassess this, because we know that the city council some time back paid for the lights at Marion. So this could be a benefit to the whole community if we would host this. The design by OPN is just absolutely perfect for the setup, for the parking. The one road that's going to be coming in, the city is going to be paying for that to get to that area. So it's a win-win situation if we could get them to help us out a little bit more. Like you said, Rachel, if we have that extra, then we can apply that extra money on that savings that Barry was talking about and maybe put it someplace else. So hopefully the wisdom will carry through city council. We can only hope. Doesn't hurt to ask, okay?
Can I ask one more quick question? And that is, since we are adding those lights now, would it be possible down the road to add additional lights to those courts that don't have them? In other words, is the electric then there for that? Would that be a very difficult thing? I didn't know if there needed to be anything additional, like run to those.
There would have to be additional runs, but have a power outlet.
Okay.
One question I have, and this is more from my own curiosity, is there any other financial benefit for having lights, obviously bringing district and state competition here? Is there anything else that would bring to the district financial-wise? I don't know how all that works.
Concessions?
Right, that's kind of what I'm asking. That's kind of the only thing.
I asked the
mean,
same question, yeah.
Do districts get any financial incentive to host anything like that?
Very minimal.
Okay.
Usually just kind of offsets your expenses for the most part, but there's a little bit of value for the district that way.
Concessions and paying for the officials.
And then I guess the other
how they
advantage we
do
would
that.
get, Matt, is not so much financial, but it's always good for our student athletes to have a chance to compete in their home locations. Just convenience and transportation and familiarity, that's always a definite positive. The other thing I would say that is a benefit for us with the lights, but not a financial one necessarily, is we do try to make sure many of our facilities as possible are open for community use. So that'd be another opportunity that the lights would also, we've talked about, there'd be a timer that they could use for the lights until a certain amount that we can schedule, so community use could use them for nighttime use as well. But now there's no financial gain unless we started to charge people for that, which was not our plan. But there are some non-financial benefits to it, I think, that from community-wise and school.
The state did say that they would only hold this with a facility that does have lights, because sometimes there's a rain and there's a postponement and stuff like that. So they might have to finish off later in the afternoon or something, or early evening, where the lights would be incorporated. So they'd like to do this where the facility has that, the lights appropriate to continue the conquest.
Any other questions or discussion on tennis courts?
Two quick things I want to make sure the board's aware of as well. Just a reminder that the city is contributing to our plan to put a trail from Irish Drive parking lot to the tennis courts themselves. So we think parking will be a challenge out there. It already is sometimes, but I think that trail connector to the parking lot will help offset some of that, and that will be at the city's expense. And then the other piece I want to remind you is, if the board does approve this, this will go out to bid October 11th until November 1st, and then bring back to the board the bids at that time, either November board meeting or December board meeting for final action. So again, these are not bid costs, these are estimated costs before it goes out to bid.
So the trail you're talking about is from the existing parking lot does it go over to the one over by Lau Park? I mean, does it connect that way?
Yeah, I wish I had the visual. Basically, it connects, there's a little sidewalk that's coming off the Irish Drive lot, going straight west, and then it'll
Saw where it
come,
was coming in on that
Yep.
side, but I wondered where.
so it'll connect on the southeast corner of the tennis courts. We'll have a gate as part of
I
the
remember
fence there
seeing
for
that.
access. so,
Okay,
yep.
just curious.
Parking lot there on Irish Drive?
There is a nice
It's the
sized
parking lot that
parking
goes
lot.
around that new playground.
Oh,
Side
okay.
of
that's
Lau,
right.
and then there's
Okay.
the big path that
Extends way
goes to
down.
the actual education center.
Okay.
So yeah, people who want to walk in nice weather could actually park all the way at Lau and
Okay.
that way if they wanted to. So, okay. Motion by Rachel, second by Barry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Move to approve the completion of the LRC roof project and to approve payment to Dry Space Incorporated in the amount of $5,176.05.
Second.
Motion by Barry, a second by Sandra. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving to new business.
Motion to approve the initial schematic design and cost estimate for the new administration building.
Second.
Motion by Rachel and a second by Melissa. And this time, I'm on the right motion, and we're going to pause and let OPN give us an update on the project before we have our own discussion.
We are. What you're going to see tonight is very much like what you saw last time. It's got some, we continue to improve it based on input from Dave and Shannon and the whole cabinet on tweaks, but overall it's the same plan you've seen. And then though tonight what you'll see will be the discussion about the cost. And we'll go through that, and then it's up for discussion for you guys. So if you remember, we showed you this last time. The cabinet, like I said, has been continuing to send us little tweaks. We've been making little tweaks to try to improve the flow, and we're really pleased with how this layout is working out. And I think the cabinet is all seen and is pleased at the direction we're going as well. You saw these images last time, so this is really just a refresh. That aerial view, that front entry view as you come up to the building. This is the back, kind of looking over out to the stadium, and this is an opportunity kind of at the employee area, lounge area, that they can go outside and enjoy when the weather allows, especially on those crazy days. And then this is a view from the southeast, looking at the back of the building. On the left, you'll see that tower. That's the training room / boardroom, and on the right is kind of the office suites. And this is just kind of a review of the site plan we shared last time. And that was initial concept for an interior design of what that lobby might look like. You kind of see as you approach the building, you can see straight out toward the stadium and the north entry of the high school. And this didn't format as well. Sorry about that. It's all formatted nicely in columns for me. And I'm an engineer, I like columns. So this is harder. I think Barry mentioned in the discussions we've had, when we started back in 2021, when we were working back with the committees, we were looking at an 18,000 square foot program. We were looking at that for a lot of different ways. And we always knew that when we went to final programming, we would start to look at it more closely and see what makes a lot of sense for the district. So Barry's right, we've got about a 50% increase in the program size. That's allowing the freezers and the coolers and more storage to move over to that space, which makes more sense efficient-wise and functionality-wise and frees up more space here. Looking at some more storage, the opportunities for training, an IT server room, having it over there where people that are going to be working on it are right there to access it. The other thing that happened in 2021 when we first started estimating the project costs, we actually, at 5.5 million at the 18,000 square foot, we were pricing that towards the end of 21. And early in 21 is when we started seeing things rise. So we put what we thought was a nice amount of increase. We probably would have bid that or estimated that project a year prior or even 9 months prior at around $250 a square foot. And we actually priced it at $305 a square foot. So we were already seeing that, so we were trying to react to it. What's actually happened since that time is two things. One, instead of going up like 30%, it's gone up more like 50% overall budgets. So that 305 that we estimated at is right now pricing out at that 27,800 square feet. That's pricing out at 392. So instead of that 30%, it's more like a 50% increase that we've been seeing kind of at different materials. So that's what we're seeing, and we're trying to allow for that. When you go to that final line for the overall project costs, So that middle line, the construction estimate, that's what, on bid day, that's the number we get back. But that's not the only cost that goes into a project. You have what we call our soft costs. So those are, we get to get paid, just like someone else said they get, oh, Nate said he likes to get paid. We like to get paid too.
I don't think we pay you in cash, though.
That's okay. We pass this to marching band individuals. So it's design fees, it's consultant fees, it's surveys, it's the printing the documents that people have to view to check out, it's commissioning costs, it's furniture and fixtures and equipment to go in the building. So there's a lot of line items that go over it. And what we do is we maintain an overall project budget, but it's about a 20% cost. So where we sit today is at about a $13 million overall project cost for this program. So when we showed you this last time, and I think Shannon gave you input about this is what the cabinet sees are our needs, you guys kind of indicated we want to make sure that this building is appropriate for everything we want to do over there. So the cost estimate we're sharing with you, unless we dramatically take a look at that program size, that's kind of what it is right now. And we're seeing it across the board. We're constantly monitoring with our third-party cost estimator. We're looking at what bids are coming in at. We're looking at costs of materials, and while lumber may have come down a little bit, this summer glass took a 40% jump. We're seeing a lot of different things happening in construction, and we're trying to react to that, even in the terms of materiality, and we'll continue to do that through design. This is schematic design, and so what we're asking you tonight is to say, yep, this is the size of program we want for this building. That is the place we want it. We like where the design is headed, and we understand that that is the budget. It's not saying, you're not saying tonight, I approve $13 million for an overall project. We're gonna continue to try to manage that, but I can tell you it's not going to be a lot less than that. We're looking at things from materials that we use, constantly monitoring that, but we just want from you to say, yep, you're on the right track, and we like this schematic design. Does that pretty much say it, Shannon?
Does. The only thing I would add to it is, just to reiterate what Vicky's saying, is the step that we're in right now is not the final decision-making step. But this is a lot of work that's taking place, and we want to make sure before we're getting farther down the road, make sure that we're on the right track with everything. Very volatile situation as far as cost, which you guys are well aware of in our economy right now. But the one piece I do want to talk a little bit about is the space aspect, because we did spend some time originally talking about, do we move our offices to a new facility and keep nutrition services here, keep some of our IT cave type areas we have here, some storage things here. Obviously that would save cost, but for the long-term use of that building, it just didn't feel like that was going to be the best decision for us from a functionality standpoint. And then we'd have to add to whatever building we built, and then that would not be, we assume that cost will only be more expensive than what this currently is as well. So that's when a lot of the square footage increases went up, is starting to move those type of features to this building to have everything under one roof. So there's a little more context on how it got to the point where it's at as well.
Just like to share some of our committee discussion. The Finance Audit Committee unanimously supports where this is going. So we had a very in-depth conversation. What we looked at as a committee is that when we started facilities as a whole, and we came up with, we were brought with the 6 projects overall. And if you remember, JT presented us with like $50 million was what we could afford for facilities overall, and we were going to try and do these projects within that. But we also knew that this was going to happen, and so we set it up in phases. This building is phase 1. We need more space for our high school students. The only way to do that is to get administration out of this building. Like, this isn't it'd be nice if we could do this. This is the first step in a sequence of things that have to happen. We don't have phase 2 timed out yet to specifics, because we knew that we might have to push some of those projects out. Our feeling as a committee, and Barry and Clark can jump in here in a second, was that we're still within the facilities budget of what we can afford. We may just have to not do phase 2 as soon as we had originally planned. And a lot changes with save dollars. Our estimate for this year is already higher, so we don't know that, but we do know that we need this building. It makes sense to put IT in the new building and not have it in this building. It makes sense to move nutrition over there. It makes sense to build a functional building that allows for a little bit of growth Marion needs more housing, that's going to mean we're going to need more space. So that was our committee discussion, and if Barry and Clark want to add anything else?
Just a real quick comment. You know, one comment was made that we could hold back on the technology. IT could stay in this building and function, but it's short term. So in the long run, we're still going to end up having to move that someplace, and it's going to be more expensive in the future. And with what we just went through the last 6 months, I think it's very critical that we put money into our IT. We get them functional where we want to be. So that's a real small piece of the whole package. So it still goes back to the critical piece that we need more space for our high school students, and that's really where we're going back to. We're not moving because we want to move. We're moving because we really need to. So.
I love that all of that will be under one roof, that IT's there and nutrition, all of the freezers, everything is in one place. That makes sense for the long run.
It's like when you build a house and you decide not to finish your basement right away, and then you have to come back and do that. And when you do that, it's always more expensive than it would have been in order if you had just did it from the beginning. And I think it makes the most sense to have all of these things housed under one roof. And I think if we don't do it now, we'll regret it later.
I have a couple questions. One is there anything that will still remain in this building or somewhere else that in a perfect world should be in this building but isn't in the design right now?
Question. I don't think so. As I'm just thinking through what else we would move there. I'm looking at cabinets, see if I'm overlooking something, but don't think there is, unless we made a massive change. I moved like transportation, maintenance, but that doesn't make any sense because our current facility has a lot of features there that are specific to that wouldn't even fit there. So I don't think there is. I'm looking cabinet and they're kind of. Correct. We're still planning to keep that. Just feedback from our department says that would make sense to keep it that way as well. Think of anything else either. Good question. We hadn't really thought about moving something else there in addition to it.
And then my other question is more for you regarding projections of building costs. We know that this building isn't going to be built tomorrow, and so over the course of the time that this building were to be built, what are you seeing and hearing about the unknowns? Because it's all a guessing game right now for most of us, but I think that there's theories out there of what we anticipate over the next couple of years. Is this what's your confidence level in these numbers, and do you think that they'll go up significantly over the time of the build? Do you think that we've got a good ballpark number? Do you think that materials will at some point start to come down over the next couple of years?
We're seeing so much volatility.
Yeah.
It's funny because remember when lumber took it just
Yeah.
went sky high. You couldn't buy you'd see a sheet of plywood in someone's pickup and you thought, oh my gosh, they're rich. And then we saw things like steel go way up and then steel started to normalize. Now oil-based products are high still. So we're seeing that volatility. Precast, at one time when we were conceptualizing this building, we saw that larger volume as a precast. Now, precast is literally a year out to get beds to be able to produce precast, and the premium that you're paying for it, we're seeing it price out the same as masonry, which is unusual. So we're going to continue to follow that. As far as a crystal ball, I can tell you that we are, just like in that first number that we anticipated, we had built-in contingencies, and we're building in an escalation and in contingencies in this cost estimate. So we feel like we positioned ourselves well. So our hope is that those contingencies and those inflation factors that we have built in will help. We do have another pricing exercise. So if you approve to say move forward, then we'll have at the end of design development as our next phase. And we'll have another pricing exercise either at the end of DD, early CD construction document phase. 50% construction. Okay. So we'll have another opportunity before this ever goes out to bid to do another costing exercise, which will give us even more validity to the pricing exercise we're doing. So what happens now is we build a little more escalation and contingency in, and as we get more design and we can get a finer and move the project along in months, then we'll be able to reduce some of those contingencies because we'll have a really closer estimation to when bid time is.
Okay.
So I think we feel pretty good that we've built in what we need to at this point.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Let's hope for not another pandemic or anything.
You're asking a very good question, Melissa, but, you know, I don't know the construction world. All I know in my business, in the financial world, inflation is the buzzword today. And inflation keeps ticking. Supply and demand and inflation. So, I mean, we can't plan.
Yeah.
You know, we can all hope, but it's, yeah, so thank you.
I will tell you that the nice thing is what you have done as a board and district in terms of positioning yourselves in your financial situation. We have clients that are in the K-12 world, and Shannon and Dave, they know them, that are in a much tougher situation where they may be approved or passed a bond or something, and they frankly can't afford what they had hoped to do. So you're planning, you're planners, I think you're being very strategic about this moving forward.
And just to piggyback on what Melissa asked, what does that projection that you have, and I understand that we'll get, when we get closer, we'll have better numbers, but how close is that to, let's say, the last 2 years inflation, out 2 years when construction starts? Does that number sort of reflect that same line, or is it lower?
I'm not sure we can answer that because inflation's been crazy lately. We track our construction numbers. Really, every time we have a bid in any of our offices, we track it. We also rely on a third-party estimator that does costing all over the state, and so we track along with them. So we can tell you more construction costs. We've been seeing about 50% increase in cost over the last 15 to 18 months, I would say. So I'm not sure, but I'm not a financial, I'm not of that inflation part and how that's tracking along with it, I don't know.
I'm just kind of trying to get a rough idea in my head. Is this I'm hoping the last 2 years is worst case scenario for inflation, and it doesn't keep going at that rate or even higher. So I was just kind of curious if these kind of numbers reflect that sort of trajectory, but.
I would say, and Alicia, you can answer, but that $392 a square foot is something we would have never guessed a year and a half or 2 years ago, never. And that's got some contingency built in just for what Barry's talking about, what you're talking about. If inflation goes, it's gonna account for some of that. Now, if it goes crazy, does it account for everything? We would have said it did a year and a half ago to 2 years ago, and now all we can do is try to be as planful as we can and put those contingencies in there and continue to do cost estimating.
We put in the percentage for cost estimation that the estimator recommended that we put in there.
The thing I'll add to it is approval tonight, as Vicki's already mentioned, does not mean that's official final approval. There's kind of two other opportunities you're going to have to approve, and you hope to have more specific information at that time. We tentatively have planned the December board meeting to do exactly what they were talking about, the 50% CD cost estimate time period that time, to bring back more specific information for you as we continue to tweak the plans and better idea of cost estimates at that time. And then our bid date we're looking at is the January 23rd board meeting to have a public hearing and decision at that time for final plans before it goes out to bid. So there'll be those two other options. And then honestly, when bids come back, I guess there's a third option then too, that if costs come in, we think it's going to be this much, and bids come back 50% higher, we'll have a whole other conversation then of what do we do from that point too. So a decision today is not by any means obligating you to anything except allowing us to continue to move forward on the plan. And if you had cold feet after today and just said, we need to put a halt, then that would change our work as well. I'm not hearing that, so that makes me feel good about where we're at. So.
We like the design that you're going towards. The program, we agree with the program, understanding that's what we're estimating that program to cost you right now. That's really what we need your approval for to keep moving forward to our next phase of design.
That was what I was digging through, was the bid schedule isn't 2 years out. It's more like in the next 3 to 6 months. So while a lot can happen, because we know it has in the last 3 to 6 months, at least we're not looking at 2 more years of inflation before we have a price. It's really, the next steps are truncated. So we'll know a lot more a lot sooner.
Yes.
Any other questions? All right, I have a motion by Rachel and a second by Melissa. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Go forth and get more numbers.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work. Thanks for all your hard work.
Looks great.
Okay, next up, policy recommendations.
Motion to approve the first reading of the policy recommendations with the exception of 502.3 and 1004.3.
Second.
A motion by Rachel, a second by Melissa. Any further discussion on the policies presented?
Does that honor the request from? Okay.
So we will pull 502.3 and 1004.3. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Is that an aye, just a late aye or a nay?
Nay.
Okay.
Sorry.
Move to approve the open enrollment request as presented.
Second.
I have a motion by Barry and a second by Clark. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second. Motion by Sandra and a second by Rachel. Any discussion?
I have a question regarding Exhibit 804.4. It's a contract for hand-in-hand for up to $251,087.04. The term of the contract is August 23rd, 2022 through June 16th, 2023. Bringing this to the attention, as I have in the past on these types of contracts where we're entering into contracts that have already been started.
This one actually is not a service contract. The services are continuing. This is a renegotiation for updating enrollment numbers and the funding allocated, and it had to go from hand-in-hand, verifying the certified students for enrollment, and then that had to go to the state and get approval from the state to be added because it's the statewide preschool program, and then it had to come back to us. So it's actually not a starting of services contract, it's payment for those students.
There was a discrepancy this past year due to the lack of paperwork completed by hand in hand. So their numbers and our numbers were different. And as soon as we quote this, they challenged it and we challenged it, and we were able to prove that those students were actually in the seats, first of all. So like like Britt just said, it is not a brand new contract, it's just continuance of a 3-year contract with those small changes.
It's not a 3-year, it's a contract that goes out every year. And it gets updated with enrollment numbers. So they challenged enrollment numbers because we had a lower number, they had a higher number, they believed. And so by the time we got that through the DE, saying yes, you can go ahead and get those additional kids, but we weren't going to honor a higher number unless we knew the money was coming from the state. And so that took some time to get through that process. And so once we got confirmation that that was in fact we were going to get the funding for these kids, then we were okay with changing the contract to reflect a higher number of kids to get that back to them.
Thank you for the clarification, I appreciate it.
Problem.
The drilling will be done now that we've said we want to go forth with the tennis courts. Now the drilling will happen, is that correct?
This is soil testing.
Yeah.
So we have to, once we get that, yes, then we'll go ahead and then they'll start doing testing because they need to have the soils conditions in the documents when we go out for bid so that people know what the bids are, knows what conditions of the soils are underneath the, so that's all part of it, yes.
Any other, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to congratulate Connie Youngworth on her retirement and all the things that she has done for our students throughout her tenure at Linn-Mar, as she is retiring as a student support associate at Boulder Peak. I hope she enjoys retirement.
All right, so motion by Saunders, second by Rachel. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Board communication.
We better go through the numbers first.
Board communications, calendar. We're going to go over all the October stuff in our work session, so we won't have to duplicate it here. We have a board visit Thursday at Hazel Point. So looking forward to that. That's our first one of the year. If you guys haven't RSVP'd to Gala yet on the rest of the board visits, please do that. Do we have a volunteer to do the October 20th Marion City Council meeting?
You can do that.
You guys want to?
Doesn't
Get
matter.
Oh, since you just did one, we'll let Rachel do this
That's
one,
fine.
and you can have the next one if you want it. Okay, so Rachel will take the October 20th City Council meeting. All right. Any other communications for the good of the order?
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion by Barry, second by Rachel to adjourn at 6:30. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.